So it's just a short overview in order to open the question, the discussion for Horst-Christian after. So okay, so I already showed you the problem of the plastics pollution this morning, and also the global plastics pollution graphics I was already showing. Just to remind you that I think that one of our main problems we're going to have is this is the pollution of macroplastics and microplastics.
Which plastic that you consider?
Yes, I thought.
Some of them yes, some of them no.
Sorry. Okay. This is just because I go up from the beginning, from what I was showing this morning. So one of the major problems we're facing with the plastics is the plastics pollution. And this morning I was already showing this photo, which I was taking in Antananarivo in Madagascar last year. And it, in my feeling, summarizes quite well what plastics pollution does to our planet. And then there are some you can have some global plastics pollution cartographies, and this one is coming from the UN environmental program, and it is showing you that plastics pollution is a generalized problem, and well, 80% of the pollution which is going to the oceans is coming from the land, where 50% is coming from the rivers, and the UN was estimating that approximately 1,000 rivers are accountable for 80% of the global annual pollution. And then we have also marine transport, which accounts for 20%, which is still also quite a high number of plastics input into the oceans. And because in the UN document, Europe was always masked. So I was using another cartography from OceanEye. OceanEye is a non-profit organization which comes from Switzerland, and they are collecting, they're doing their own missions, but they're also collecting plastics pollution data all around the world, but they're very much centered to the Mediterranean Sea. And so you see here an extract of their cartographies they are doing, and they can be they're online on their website. And then when you want to know exactly what is the pollution in one point, then you can go on their website and you have the numerical data there. And I was using this because this morning I already said that AgroParisTech is very proud that there are some points they're accounting coming out of AgroParisTech's measurements. And when you compare OceanEye's microplastics pollution cartography with the modeling, which is just below, you can see that it rather fits. And this is also quite interesting because this then can help us also to understand the pollution dynamics. And one of the things one can see is that, well, when I was telling you that 80% is coming from the land and 50% is coming from the river, that the high pollution concentrations, they are always there where there are the big European rivers going into the Mediterranean Sea. What are we? So OceanEye and the others, they are measuring in one point, they're measuring the macroplastics, but they're also measuring the microplastics. And for the microplastics, there is a convention. In fact, microplastics are plastics which are below 2 or 5 millimeters of size, which means that is the 2 or 5 millimeters, it depends. It's not completely stabilized. So between 2 and 5, the cut-up is taken for microplastics, and it is always the longest size of the item one is fishing from the sea, for example. When it is larger than this, then it's macroplastics, so it's a big pollution in the environment. And when it is smaller than 1 micrometer, then we are going into the place of into the field of nanoplastics. This is for the classification. It's just a very easy one with respect to size. And then we have two other things to consider. There are primary microplastics. Those are microplastics which are directly entering the sea or the environment. And they can be abrasives, pre-production of pellets, fibers for textiles, for examples. So they are already small particles when they are entering the environment, whereas secondary microplastics are microplastics which are formed in situ in the environment by mechanical abrasion, for example, or chemical, thermal, or biological degradation. The pathways to nature of all those plastics are multiple. What you can see is that we have a lot of pollutions coming from cities. So you have already the city dust, the dusts, the tire dusts because of the abrasion of the car tires. Textiles, bottles, bags, which are coming out of urban wastes and urban pollutions. Then there is, of course, a runoff and also wind taking away plastics from landfills or plastics which were just accidentally abandoned in nature. Then you have intakes which are coming from storm weather. This is also a large intake rule, so you should not think that all the plastics pollution is something which is a little bit like criminal. Storms, floods, and climatic events with, like this, they are bringing a lot of plastics in an accidental manner inside the environment. Then you have also plastics coming from agricultural applications. For example, plastic which is coating of seeds or fertilizers. You can have plastics coming out of the wastewater treatment and, well, I don't know, application of biosolids of animal manure. So there is a lot of different ways to bring plastics into the environment. When one is trying to get a little bit of some figures out of there, so I was just listing what would be the primary microplastics, and I was trying to use several sources in order to have like an idea which one would be the most important one. So it is not completely granted because the sources are not coherent among them, but what I feel should be a little bit the least is at first this is the fibers from synthetic textiles which are coming out of our washing machines, for example. Then you have the artificial turf pitches from, I don't know, sports places and things like this, bringing microplastics, primary microplastics. The vehicle tires, the road markings, the personal care products and detergents, plastic pellets lost to the environment, marine coatings, and then city dust. So here you have one of the quantified papers which is showing you, in fact, this classification. And then from the secondary microplastics, which is the ones which are going into the environment as a large object, you have the breakdown from cigarette filters, as cigarette filters are by far the most abundant dirt in the environment. Then there are fishing gears, films, foams, pellets. So what you can see also here is that for the packagings in the microplastics classifications, they are not on the top level. They are coming in the third place, more or less. So first cigarettes and then food wrappers, plastic bottles, plastic caps, and things like this. It's not very nice. So what can it bring to the environment? So in the marine environment, what was already seen for the plastic debris, which are very large ones. So you have a persistent pollution in the environment, which can be ingested by marine fauna. And when it is large objects, then you have the reduction of stomach capacity, false feelings of satiety, and changes in the feeding behavior, which is an ecotoxical effect in the end, an injury to the gastrointestinal tract, and entanglement of animals in ghost fishing nets. So these are known and well-described ecotoxic effects of those plastics. And for the microplastics, a little bit less clear. But one of the concerns is already that there can be co-adsorption of other persistent pollutants, which can accumulate on the plastic waste. And then you have a higher exposure of the fauna to persistent chemical pollutants, which are coming with the microplastics. In the terrestrial and freshwater ecosystem, you can have the same effects. And comes on top of it that for the soil health, it was already shown that microplastics can alter the soil properties, affect the soil structure in its water retention, and then it can also change the microbial communities, so the different species you can find in soils. And it was shown that when you have a lot of plastics in a soil, then the diversity of the microbial communities is decreasing. And this can, in the end, impact plant growth and soil fertility. And for freshwater species, well, the problematics are similar to the marine environments. The ingestion of microplastics as for the marine environments can lead to adverse effect on health and reproduction of this type of animals. Concerning human health, I want to, as a preliminary, say that this is a very active field of research, all of this. So not all effects are known and not all of the knowledge is stabilized. So what seems to come out for the moment, but as research is still ongoing, take this as a first preliminary list. Ingestion and inhalation. So it is clear that airborne exposure can bring respiratory problems because airborne exposure can cause inflammation in the respiratory tissues, so if in the lungs of us. And then when you have inflammation, this can cause other health problems. And human ingestion of microplastics is also shown. However, it is not completely clear what the microplastics are doing until ingestion. So the most observed harm for the moment was not linked to the size in itself, but also to the chemical composition of the microplastics, which are coming when you are ingesting dust, for example. Then the toxicological effects were analyzed on exposure, for example, of human cells. And then there you have laboratory studies showing that you can have cell damage because of oxidative stresses, inflammation, and cytotoxicity in mammalian cells. And this then could be, when it is happening in a living organism, to tissue damage and impaired cellular functions. The immune system can be triggered. Microplastics could trigger immune responses, which may also result in chronic inflammation and immune system dysfunction. And again, the problem of the chemical exposure, because plastics can have toxic additives inside or NIAS. And then we are coming to what we are already managing also for the food contact materials. So there is a lot of work ongoing here. It was just masked, I think, but you have all the references I was using for it below. So for me, one of the open questions are, as a material scientist, the generation pathways of plastics. So the breakdown of microplastics, the breakdown kinetics of the plastics in the environment, and they are almost unknown. So there are some models describing it, but it is almost unknown how really plastics are breaking down, that the do is okay, but we have no quantification of it. And this quantification, in my feeling, is necessary in order to help us also with better exposure scenarios. The long-term health effects are unknown for the moment. Chronic effects of low-level exposure are not well studied, but because it is a young research field. So most of the exposure studies for the moment are like on cell lines, and they're often using very high doses of microplastics. So we cannot judge for the moment what the long-term low-dose exposures would be. The exposure pathways also are not quite well understood. So it is not completely clear how a microplastic could eventually reach a placenta, whereas it was already shown in human placentas, but how the hell it goes there is not very easy to understand. And then, of course, the impact of size and shape on the health effects. So they could be, the toxicity of the microplastics could depend on this, but there also would be no more research needed to elucidate these factors. So this was just an opening around the question, and now I hand over to Horst-Christian.
Okay, I try to be short. I hope that you will have a little bit more time than 6 o'clock to have a true type of discussion. My task is today to think about, can we really help a lot if we substitute plastic materials in packaging? And I will already say, yes, we can help a bit, but mainly we won't help to solve the problems of the other continents, so to say. They need to do this by themselves. We may be able to solve the problem a bit of the Mediterranean Sea. Nevertheless, first question, can we eliminate plastic packaging? I will briefly tell you how difficult this is, especially because of the requirements of the food products. How can we perform with other packaging materials, and where are they working and where not? And in the end, some conclusions. So the first thing is we have a lot of different global targets, not only reducing food losses, but also reduce plastic emissions, but these are only some of them. And the problem is, if we want to solve all of them, we cannot only simply restrict ourselves to a single target, so to say. So we need to keep in mind that there's other targets as well. And the good old engineering knowledge is, if we solve one problem, we create 1 or 2 or 3 new ones. So it's not that simple. So we have a German organization, a company who is doing a lot of polls and investigations on different packaging strategies, and they simply stated that if you replace plastics by paper and plastic laminates, you increase the packaging by 40% in weight. And if you would like to ban all plastics from packaging, you increase everything by nearly a factor of 5, which means that you get another environmental problem, namely global warming potential simply due to transport processes. So it's not that simple. And I try to make this visible on this slide. So if you try different strategies and look at the effects of these strategies on different targets, you will recognize that you have, for instance, some points where you have no effect or even a positive effect, but you may have other areas where you have a strongly negative effect. I won't concentrate too much on that figure because we all know these things, and more or less I can easily add 3 other targets as well. So it's let's say, a problem that could be solved if you look at the area, at the strategy, which creates the relatively low additional environmental effects, which is circular plastics economy on the one hand side and light weighting of the packaging on the other hand side, because also this reduces the packaging consumption in total weight, so to say. Okay, so it doesn't solve every problem, but it gives a solution to the problem we have, to the problems we have. So this figure should show you just simply why it's important which packaging material you are using for which group of products. For instance, you cannot pack beer in paper. Very simple. Some other problems are a little bit more complicated, but every product needs a certain requirement from the packaging. If this is not fulfilled, you end up with more product losses, and this is the counteractive effect. So especially when you look at different types of plastics, this again is the area where the sensitive products are and their requirements and barrier properties. And if you look, for instance, at the biopolymers we are just addressing at the moment, you will recognize, for instance, that cellulose, which is also a biopolymer, is far outside this area. So cellulose alone doesn't help you in any case. You see that glass does quite a good job in spite of being just too heavy, but you still have to think about the closure of the glass packagings, which gives some residual permeability, and this means that they are not perfect. The only perfect things in spite of the corrosion are metal cans, but you know that we cannot replace everything by metal cans. So it's really much more difficult than most people think. So this is, in a nutshell, that's what I would say. Metal packagings, if we replace everything by metal, no problem, but we have a higher weight, and okay, not even all products can be packed in metal anyhow, but many of them. Glass, we have a much higher weight. Paperboard, we have a low functionality. So in the end, many people, and what we observe on the market today is that we see a lot of coated papers, more than in the past. And the question is, where will they end up? They will recognize that they have a lot of functional problems. So you go up with the polymer thickness, but then you go down with the recyclability. So still a lot of problems there. And I also brought some figures from my personal experience. I made some photographs from packagings at home. For instance, these are coated papers with polymeric barriers, much thicker than to be addressed as being recyclable. And this is a very negative example. It's simply plastics, but fully printed brown to look like paper. So this is also something that happens quite often. This is from our research. We coated paper with a lacquer filled with layered silicate particles, which gives a good barrier, but there's still a lot of technical problems to be solved. But again, look at this here. Even they do not only coat the paper on the outer side, but they put a layer of polymer inside, which you'd never see, just to improve the moldability of the product. So in the end, you will always have something that will not be recyclable. So it's not that easy. Finally, if we look for a circular economy, the question is, will there be a big success? Well, if we look at today's performance, you see that in Europe, we recycle about 7% of all plastics back into packaging, and a lot of products down here still goes somewhere where we don't know what really happens with them. So it still remains a big issue, and therefore this is the reason why the EU has done a work in the PPWR to increase the amount of recycled material in packaging themselves. So in it, it's reasonable, but the problems are still large. Okay, finally, my conclusions on that. If people think that we simply can replace plastics, we end up in a lot of problems. We need this circular economy. We also need to think about, and not also, but this is a very big thing, food contact conformity of recyclates. Olivier will do a lot of work on that in the future, I think. And coated papers are not the solution. They can be used for some applications, but not all. And also the technique for making them is not well established. A much more important thing is to work on sorting plans and methods of discrimination between food and non-food post-consumer packages, which is done in the industry today. So I'm very optimistic on that. And we have a working system in our conventional economy that is different from that what we need in the future, by the way. So also this means that we need to bring together much more than we did today. And you talked about bio-based systems. Yes, they are interesting for the future, but you cannot simply say they can be used and then composted. I think bio-based materials must be also recyclable. We must be able to recycle bio-based materials like conventional ones, and only this can be done. It's the other way to say, okay, they are bio-based and they can be biodegradable. This is enough. This is not enough. It's just half of the way. Good. That's it. Thank you very much.